Rosa Washington, an elderly black woman, had lived in her house for over 50 years, witnessing the neighborhood's many changes. But one quiet afternoon, everything shifted when the police showed up at her doorstep, asking loaded questions and demanding that she prove her right to live on her own property. The tension escalated, but just minutes later, a black SUV pulled up. The man who stepped out was tall and dignified, and with just one sentence, he silenced the officers. Who was he, and why did his presence change everything? Before we continue with this story, let us know where you're watching from. Comment your city or country below, and don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow, we'll bring you another inspiring story, tailor-made for you. The story begins. Rosa Washington, an elderly black woman with silver hair and bright eyes, sat on the porch of her modest home in suburban Atlanta, Georgia. Her calloused hands, evidence of years of hard work, gently pushed the swing back and forth as she looked out onto the street she had called home for over 5 decades. Born in the segregated South in the 1940s, Rosa lived through the tumultuous civil rights era, raising her family amidst the struggle for equality. She had marched with Dr. King, faced fire hoses and police dogs, and instilled in her children the values of perseverance, dignity, and education as the keys to a better future. Her proudest achievement was her son, Thurgood Washington. Overcoming all odds, Thurgood rose from their humble beginnings to become one of the most respected judges in the state of Georgia. At 50 years old, he was known for his unwavering commitment to justice and his ability to look beyond racial and economic barriers in his courtroom. Despite his success, Thurgood never forgot his roots. He visited Rosa every Sunday, bringing groceries and spending hours listening to her stories and wisdom. For her part, Rosa kept his childhood room exactly as it was, a shrine to the dream she had nurtured in her only child. The neighborhood around Rosa had changed over the years. Once a close-knit black community, it had gradually become gentrified, with mostly white families moving in, bringing with them renovation projects and rising property values. Rosa watched these changes with a mix of curiosity and apprehension, always greeting new neighbors with a smile, but wary of the shifting dynamics. Despite the changes, Rosa remained a pillar of the community. She volunteered at the local church, tended a small vegetable garden that she shared with neighbors, and was always ready with a kind word or a home-cooked meal for anyone in need. Her house, with its peeling paint and carefully tended flower beds, stood as a testament to a bygone era amidst the newly renovated homes. On this particular afternoon, Rosa sat on her porch, sipping a glass of sweet tea, watching the world go by. She nodded to Mrs. Peterson, a newcomer to the street, who was walking her poodle. Rosa couldn't help but notice how Mrs. Smith quickened her pace as she passed by, clutching her purse a little tighter. Rosa sighed, a lifetime of similar experiences weighing on her shoulders. But she straightened her back, lifted her chin, and continued her gentle rocking on the swing. She had weathered far worse storms in her life. Little did she know that the events about to unfold would test her resilience once again and shake the foundations of her quiet life. The peaceful afternoon was shattered by the sudden wail of police sirens. Rosa's eyes widened, her tranquility broken as she watched 2 police patrol cars race down her quiet street, screeching to a halt in front of Mrs. Peterson's house, 3 doors down. Rosa's heart sank. Memories of past encounters with law enforcement flooded her mind. She watched as 3 police officers, 2 white men and a Hispanic woman, emerged from the vehicles, their hands hovering near their holstered guns as they approached Mrs. Peterson, who was gesticulating wildly on her front lawn. Trying to listen, Rosa caught snippets of conversation. Suspicious person lurking around and doesn't belong here, drifting through the warm afternoon air. A chill ran down Rosa's spine as she realized Mrs. Smith was pointing directly at her house. Before Rosa could process what was happening, the officers strode purposefully toward her porch. She gripped the armrests of her rocking chair, trying to keep her hands from shaking as she prepared to face whatever was coming. "Ma'am," the lead officer, a burly man with close-cropped hair and cold blue eyes, spoke as he approached. "We've received reports of suspicious activity in the area. We'd like to ask you a few questions." if you don't mind. Rosa straightened in her chair, summoning the dignity that had carried her through countless confrontations over the years. I don't mind, she replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. Though I'm not sure how I can be of assistance. I've simply been sitting here enjoying the afternoon. The female officer, younger and seemingly more empathetic, stepped forward. Ma'am, a resident reported seeing someone matching your description walking around the neighborhood, peering into windows. Can you tell us where you've been for the past hour? Rosa's eyes widened in disbelief. Young lady, I've been right here on this porch since after lunch. I haven't left this spot, much less been strolling around the neighborhood. At my age, that would be quite a feat. The third officer, who had been silent until now, sneered. Yeah, right. Look here, old lady, we have a witness who says otherwise. Why don't you just come clean and tell us what you were really up to? Rosa felt a surge of indignation rise within her. Young man, I've lived in this house for over 50 years. I have no need or desire to be peering into anyone's windows. I am a law-abiding citizen, and I resent the implication that I would be involved in any criminal activity. The lead officer's demeanor shifted, his posture becoming more aggressive. Listen, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Just admit you were casing the houses and we can settle this down at the station. Rosa's hands began to tremble, but her voice remained firm. I haven't done anything wrong, and I have no intention of going anywhere with you. If you have any further questions, you can ask them right here on my porch. The situation quickly escalated. The officers, frustrated by Rosa's refusal to comply with their demands, grew increasingly confrontational. They began to question her right to be in the neighborhood, demanding to see proof of residency and identification. I don't carry my identification with me when I'm sitting on my own porch, Rosa retorted, her patience wearing thin. My name is Rosa Washington, and as I've told you, I've lived here for over half a century. If you don't believe me, you can check the property records. The lead officer's face darkened with anger. All right, he said, that's it. If you're not going to cooperate, we're going to have to take you in for obstruction of justice. Get up slowly and put your hands behind your back. Rosa's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the gravity of the situation. She thought of her son, Michael, and the lessons of dignity and resistance she had instilled in him. Taking a deep breath, she made her decision. I will not, she stated, her voice ringing out clear and strong. I have done nothing wrong, and I will not be treated like a criminal in my own home. If you want to arrest me, you'll have to drag me off this porch, and I promise you I won't go quietly. The officers exchanged glances, clearly not expecting such fierce resistance from an elderly woman. As they debated their next move, Rosa silently prayed for strength and for someone, anyone, to witness what was happening and intervene. Little did she know that her ordeal was about to take a turn that would shake the foundations of the local law enforcement and send shockwaves throughout the entire community. As the tension on Rosa's porch reached a boiling point, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. The officers, so focused on their confrontation with Rosa, barely noticed the newcomer until a commanding voice rang out. Just what exactly is going on here? Everyone turned to see a tall, impeccably dressed black man, appearing to be in his 50s, striding toward the porch. His tailored suit and air of authority immediately commanded attention. Rosa's face lit up with relief and pride. Michael, she called, her voice trembling slightly. Thank God you're here. The lead officer, sensing the shift in dynamics, stepped forward. Sir, this is a police matter. I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. Thurgood's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. His elderly mother, clearly shaken but defiant, surrounded by aggressive officers on her own porch. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but laced with barely suppressed anger. Officer, I am Judge Thurgood Washington of the Georgia Supreme Court, and this, he gestured towards Rosa, is my mother. Now I suggest you explain to me why you are harassing an elderly woman on her own property before I start making a few calls that none of you are going to like. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The color drained from the officers' faces as they realized who they were dealing with. The lead officer's aggressive posture crumbled, replaced by a look of panic. "Judge Washington," he stammered, we didn't know. There was a report of suspicious activity in the neighborhood and—" Thurgood cut him off with a raised hand. "And you automatically assumed that my mother, a resident of this neighborhood for over 50 years, was the culprit based on exactly what evidence?" As the officers fumbled for an explanation, a small crowd of neighbors began to gather, drawn by the commotion. Among them was Mrs. Peterson, who now looked distinctly uncomfortable. Thurgood noticed her and addressed her directly. "Ma'am, were you the one who made the report?" Mrs. Smith hesitated before stepping forward. "I called the police. I saw someone I didn't recognize walking around, and with all the recent break-ins—" "And did the person you saw resemble my mother?" Thurgood asked, his voice dangerously calm. Mrs. Smith's face flushed with embarrassment as she looked properly at Rosa, perhaps for the first time. "I'm not sure. It all happened so fast." Thurgood turned back to the officers, his expression stern. "So let me get this straight. You received a vague report about a suspicious person, and your immediate response was to come here and attempt to arrest my mother, a respected member of this community, without any real evidence or provocation." The revelation of Rosa's identity and her son's position had completely shifted the dynamics. The officers, who had been so confident in their authority, now looked like chastised children. The neighbors watched in stunned silence as the ugly truth of what had almost transpired slowly sank in. Rosa, still seated on her rocking chair, observed the scene, unfolding with a mix of relief and sorrow. The respect and fear her son commanded had saved her from a potentially dangerous situation, but the fact that she needed saving was a stark reminder of the prejudices that still plagued their community. As Thurgood began to outline the various legal and ethical violations the officers had committed, Rosa closed her eyes briefly, offering a silent prayer of gratitude for her son's timely arrival, but she also prayed for understanding, for healing, and for a day when such incidents would be a thing of the past. The revelation of Rosa's true identity and her son's position set the stage for a confrontation that would have far-reaching consequences for all involved. In the tense moments following Thurgood's arrival, Rosa found herself at a crossroads. The immediate danger had passed, but the ramifications of what had just occurred weighed heavily on her mind. As she watched her son reprimand the officers, a lifetime of experiences, both painful and triumphant, flashed before her eyes. Rosa thought of the countless times she had faced discrimination, the struggles she had endured to raise her son in a world that often seemed stacked against them. She thought of the young people in her community, those who might not have a Judge Washington to come to their rescue. In that moment, Rosa made a decision that would change not only her life but the lives of many in her community. "Michael," she called out, her voice soft but firm. "That's enough, son." All eyes turned to Rosa as she slowly rose from her rocking chair, her dignity evident as she straightened her back and lifted her chin high. "What happened here today is not just about me. It's about every person who looks like me, who doesn't have a son in a position of power to protect them. We cannot simply let this go." Thurgood looked at his mother, a mix of concern and pride in his eyes. "What do you want to do, Mama?" Rosa took a deep breath. "I want to file a formal complaint, not just against these officers, but against the entire police department for allowing this kind of behavior to continue. And I want to speak out, to tell my story and the stories of others who have faced similar treatment. It's time for a change, and if I have to be the one to start it, then so be it." The repercussions of Rosa's decision were immediate and far-reaching. The officers, already shaken, now looked even more apprehensive at the prospect of a formal complaint from the mother of a judge. The gathered neighbors murmured among themselves, some nodding in agreement, others looking uneasy at the brewing conflict. Michael, after a moment of hesitation, nodded. "If that's what you want, Mama, I'll support you every step of the way. But are you sure this won't be easy?" Rosa's eyes flashed with determination. "I've never run from a fight for what's right, and I'm not about to start now." In the weeks that followed, Rosa's decision set in motion a chain of events that shook the local community to its core. The formal complaint she filed triggered an internal investigation into the police department's practices, exposing numerous other instances of racial profiling and misconduct. Rosa's story, picked up by local and then national media, became a rallying cry for those fighting against systemic racism in law enforcement. She found herself thrust into the spotlight, participating in interviews and speaking at community meetings. It was grueling work for a woman of her age, but Rosa drew strength from her son's support and the knowledge that she was making a difference. However, the fallout was not all positive. Rosa began receiving threatening phone calls and letters from those who viewed her actions as an attack on law enforcement. Some of her neighbors, uncomfortable with the attention her case brought to the area, became distant and cold. The police department, feeling under siege, initially reacted defensively. They attempted to paint Rosa as a troublemaker, digging up minor infractions from decades past to try and discredit her. But Rosa's impeccable reputation and the clear evidence of wrongdoing in her case made these attempts backfire, only further fueling public outrage. Michael, true to his word, stood by his mother throughout this ordeal. He used his connections within the legal community to ensure that Rosa's complaint was taken seriously and that she had the best possible legal representation. However, his strong advocacy for his mother's cause began to create tension in his professional life. There were whispers about his impartiality, suggestions that he should recuse himself from cases involving law enforcement. As the weeks turned into months, Rosa's case became a catalyst for broader discussions about race relations in the community. Town hall meetings were held, bringing together residents, law enforcement, and community leaders to address the long-standing issues of bias and discrimination. Rosa found herself at the center of these discussions, her quiet dignity and unwavering commitment to justice earning her respect even from those who had initially opposed her. She began working with local youth groups, sharing her experiences and encouraging young people to stand up for their rights, while also building bridges with law enforcement. The strain of her new role as a community activist took a toll on Rosa's health. There were nights when she lay awake, wondering if she had made the right decision, if the cost to her peace and privacy was worth it. But then she would receive a letter from a young person inspired by her stance, or see a news report about positive changes being made within the police department, and she knew she had chosen the right path. As the ramifications of her decision continued to unfold, Rosa often found herself going back to the words she had spoken to Thurgood on that fateful day. It's time for a change, and if I have to be the one to start it, then so be it. Little did she know then just how far that change would reach or how much it would demand of her. But as she sat on her porch each evening, watching her neighborhood with new eyes, Rosa felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything she had ever known before. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but Rosa Washington was ready to face it head-on, armed with a lifetime of wisdom and a newfound determination to see justice served not just for herself, but for her entire community. As Rosa's story spread and her fight for justice gained momentum, a second narrative began to unfold, adding layers of complexity to an already tense situation. Officer Johnson Rodriguez, the young Hispanic woman who had been present during Rosa's confrontation, found herself increasingly troubled by the incident and its aftermath. Unlike her colleagues, who had closed ranks and defended their actions, Johnson could not shake the feeling that they had been egregiously wrong in their treatment of Rosa. Driven by a mix of guilt and a genuine desire for change, Johnson began to document other instances of racial profiling and misconduct within the department. She began keeping a detailed journal, noting the dates, times, and officers involved in questionable incidents. Her actions, while motivated by good intentions, placed her in an increasingly precarious position within the department. Meanwhile, Mrs. Peterson, the neighbor who had initially called the police on Rosa, was wrestling with her own crisis of conscience. The public backlash against her actions had been severe, with many in the community labeling her a racist. Overwhelmed by guilt and seeking to make amends, Mrs. Smith reached out to Rosa, requesting a meeting and a chance to apologize in person. Their encounter, initially tense and awkward, became a turning point. Rosa, drawing on her lifetime of wisdom and capacity for forgiveness, listened to Mrs. Smith's tearful apology, and shared her own experiences of living as a Black woman in America. The conversation sparked an unlikely friendship between the two women, with Mrs. Smith becoming an unexpected ally in Rose's fight for justice. As these personal dramas unfolded, the larger community was undergoing its own upheaval. The local city council, under pressure from activists inspired by Rose's stand, began debating measures to increase police accountability. This led to heated discussions and divisions within the community, with some advocating for reform and others defending the status quo. Judge Thurgood Washington found himself navigating increasingly treacherous waters. His support for his mother's cause made him a controversial figure within the legal fraternity. Some of his colleagues on the bench privately questioned his impartiality, while others admired his courage. Thurgood was forced to walk a delicate line between his personal beliefs and his professional responsibilities. The police department, feeling the pressure from multiple sides, launched a PR campaign to improve their image. They organized community outreach events and sensitivity training sessions for officers. However, these efforts were met with skepticism by many, who saw them as superficial attempts to avoid real change. Officer Rodriguez's secret documentation of departmental misconduct grew increasingly extensive and damning. As she wrestled with the decision of whether to become a whistleblower, she found an unlikely confidant in Judge Washington. Their clandestine meetings, fraught with legal and ethical implications, added another layer of tension to the unfolding drama. Mrs. Peterson, inspired by her conversations with Rosa, started a neighborhood initiative aimed at fostering better understanding between longtime residents and newcomers. Her efforts, while well-intentioned, sometimes led to awkward and tense moments as deep-seated prejudices and misunderstandings surfaced. As these various threads developed, they began to intersect in unexpected ways. Officer Rodriguez's documentation provided crucial evidence for the City Council's police reform initiatives. Mrs. Smith's neighborhood group became a forum for discussing the broader implications of Rose's case. The stage was now set for these secondary storylines to converge with the main narrative, building towards a climax that would challenge all involved to confront their biases, question their assumptions, and work towards genuine understanding and change within their community. As the repercussions of Rose's stand against injustice continued to ripple through the community, the relationships between the key figures in this unfolding drama began to evolve in unexpected ways. The unlikely friendship between Rosa and Mrs. Smith deepened, transcending their initial roles as victim and accuser. Their regular afternoon teas on Rosa's porch became a symbol of reconciliation and growth. Mrs. Peterson, eager to understand and make amends, listened intently as Rosa shared stories of her life during the civil rights era. "You know, Mildred," Rosa said one afternoon, using Mrs. Peterson's first name, "when I was your age, I never would have imagined I'd be sitting here having tea with a white neighbor who once called the police on me." Mrs. Smith's eyes welled up with tears. "Oh, Rosa, I can't tell you how ashamed I am of what I did, but I'm so grateful for this chance to learn and grow." Their friendship did not go unnoticed. Neighbors who had been wary of taking sides in the controversy found themselves drawn to the example set by these two women. Slowly, the frost of suspicion began to thaw within the community. Meanwhile, the relationship between Officer Johnson Rodriguez and Judge Thurgood Washington evolved from cautious allies to trusted confidants. Their clandestine meetings to discuss Johnson's documentation of police misconduct became a source of both tension and mutual respect. During one such meeting in a quiet corner of a local park, Johnson confessed her fears. "Judge Washington," she said, "if I go public with this information, my career is over, but if I don't, how can I live with myself?" Michael, sensing the weight of his own ethical dilemma, replied, "Sarah, the path of integrity is never easy, but it is always the right one." Their shared commitment to justice despite personal cost forged a bond that transcended their professional roles. Rosa's relationship with her son, Michael, also underwent a transformation. Always close, they now found themselves becoming partners in a cause larger than themselves. Thurgood marveled at his mother's strength and wisdom, seeing her in a new light as a leader and an activist. One evening, as they sat together on Rosa's porch, Thurgood took his mother's hand. "Mama," he said, "I've always been proud of you, but what you're doing now goes beyond anything I could have imagined." Rosa squeezed his hand, her eyes twinkling. "Well, son, where do you think you got your sense of justice from? Certainly not from those law books of yours." Their laughter, warm and genuine, carried on the evening breeze, a testament to a love and respect that had only grown stronger through adversity. Even Rosa's relationship with the wider community evolved. Those who had once seen her as just an elderly neighbor now looked to her as a source of wisdom and moral authority. Young activists sought her advice, while longtime residents marveled at the fire that still burned within their unassuming neighbor. During a community meeting at the local church, a young black man stood up. "Miss Washington," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "seeing you stand up to those officers, hearing your stories, it gives me hope that change is possible." Rosa's eyes misted over as she looked out at the diverse faces in the crowd, all turned toward her with respect and admiration. She realized that her personal stand for justice had become a catalyst for collective growth and healing. However, not all relationship changes were positive. The relationship between Officer Rodriguez and her fellow police officers grew increasingly strained as her secret documentation continued. She found herself isolated at work, viewed with suspicion by those who perceived her loyalty to waver from the unwritten code of police solidarity. The once friendly rapport between Thurgood and some of his fellow judges cooled as the controversy surrounding Rosa's case intensified. Casual lunches and social invitations became less frequent, replaced by perfunctory nods in the courthouse hallways. Yet even these strained relationships served a purpose, highlighting the deep-seated issues that needed to be addressed for true reconciliation to occur. As these relationships continued to evolve and shift, they created a complex web of connections that mirrored the larger changes taking place within the community. Each interaction, whether it brought people closer together or drove them further apart, served as a microcosm of the larger struggle for understanding and justice. Rosa, observing these shifting dynamics, came to realize that the path to real change lay not only through laws and policies, but also through the hard work of building bridges between people. As she rocked gently on her porch, watching the sun set on another day of this ongoing journey, she felt a surge of hope. The relationships being forged and tested in the crucible of this experience were laying the foundation for a more just and understanding community. The day of the town hall meeting arrived with a palpable sense of tension hanging over the community center. What had begun as a local incident had grown into a focal point for discussions about racial equity, police reform, and community relations. The large hall was packed with people from all corners of the community. Local officials and members of the media were all present. Rosa sat in the front row, her back straight and her eyes bright, with Thurgood on one side and Mrs. Smith on the other. The chief of police and several officers, including Johnson Rodriguez, sat in the opposite seats on the stage. The air crackled with anticipation and unspoken tension as the mayor announced the start of the meeting. A hush fell over the crowd. "We are here today," he began, his voice echoing through the hall, "to address the incident involving Ms. Rosa Washington and to discuss the larger issues it has brought to light within our community." The meeting began smoothly enough with various community leaders presenting their perspectives, but as it moved into the public comment portion, the true depth of the divisions within the community became apparent. Angry voices erupted from different corners of the hall. The police were just doing their job. A man shouted, his face flushed with anger. "We can't tie their hands when they're trying to keep us safe. What about our safety?" A young black woman countered. "Who keeps us safe from the people who are supposed to be protecting us?" The tension in the room escalated quickly. Years of pent-up frustration and fear erupted as community members and police supporters argued back and forth. The mayor struggled to maintain order, but the situation quickly spiraled out of control. Suddenly, Officer Johnson Rodriguez stood up, her face pale but determined. "I have something to say," she called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. All eyes turned to her as she made her way to the podium. With trembling hands, Johnson pulled out a thick folder. "For months," she began, her voice growing stronger, "I have been documenting instances of racial profiling and misconduct within our department. What happened to MS? Washington was not an isolated incident. It's part of a pattern, and it needs to stop. The room erupted in pandemonium. Johnson's colleagues stared at her with a mixture of shock and betrayal. The chief of police's face turned an alarming shade of red as he stammered incoherent words. Community members began shouting, some applauding Sarah's courage, others accusing her of betraying her badge. In that crucial moment, Rosa rose to her feet. Despite her age, she seemed to tower over the crowd as she made her way to the podium. Johnson stepped aside and Rosa took her place, her presence commanding immediate attention. "Look at us," Rosa said, her voice clear and strong. "Look at what we're doing to each other. This anger, this fear, this is exactly why we need change. But we won't achieve it by shouting at each other or by pointing fingers." As Rosa continued to speak, her words seemed to resonate with something deep within everyone present. A transformation began to take place in the room. The anger and fear that had dominated the atmosphere began to give way to something else. A collective recognition of shared humanity and the need for understanding. "We have a choice," Rosa concluded, her eyes sweeping across the crowd. "We can let this divide us further, or we can use it as an opportunity to come together, to listen to each other, and to work towards real, lasting change. The road won't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is." As Rosa's words hung in the air, the town hall event brought the community to a crossroads. The truth had been spoken, the issues laid bare. The question now was whether they could seize this moment to begin the hard work of healing and transformation, or whether the divisions that had been exposed would prove too deep to overcome. In the aftermath of the tumultuous town hall, Rosa Washington found herself at the center of a community-wide effort to address the deep-seated issues that had been brought to light. The days following the event were filled with heated discussions, passionate debates, and a flurry of activity as different groups sought to find a path forward. Recognizing the need for a structured approach to conflict resolution, Rosa, along with Michael, Johnson Rodriguez, and other community leaders, convened a series of smaller, more focused meetings. They realized that the large public forum, while powerful, was too overwhelming for many to truly engage in a meaningful dialogue. These smaller groups allowed for more intimate conversations, where people felt safer to express their true feelings and experiences. One such meeting brought together a diverse group of residents, including longtime community members, new homeowners, and local business owners. The tension in the room was palpable as Rosa opened the discussion. "We are here today," she began, her voice soft but firm, not to point fingers or assign blame, but to listen to each other and understand each other. "Every person in this room has valid experiences and concerns. Our job is to find a way forward that addresses them all." As the conversation progressed, it became clear that the issues ran deeper than just police activity or racial bias. Residents spoke about feeling disconnected from their changing neighborhood, about fears over crime and property values, and about the challenges of bridging cultural divides. A longtime resident, an older white man, spoke up. "I've lived here for 40 years, he said, his voice rough with emotion, "and sometimes I feel like I don't recognize my own neighborhood anymore. It's not about race, it's about feeling like a stranger in my own home." A young black woman responded, her voice trembling slightly. "And we feel like strangers in a place that's supposed to be our home. Can you understand what it's like to be seen as a threat just for existing in your own community?" These raw, honest exchanges were painful but necessary. Rosa and her group worked to create an environment where all voices could be heard and validated, while gently challenging participants to consider perspectives different from their own. Parallel to these community discussions, Rosa worked closely with Thurgood and Johnson to address the issues within the police department. They organized meetings between community members and police officers facilitated by professional mediators. These sessions were often tense and emotional, but they provided a crucial opportunity for both sides to see each other as human beings rather than adversaries. In one particularly powerful session, a young black man shared his experiences of being repeatedly stopped and questioned by police. "I feel like I'm treated like a criminal just for walking down the street," he said, his voice choked with emotion. A veteran officer, visibly moved, responded, I I never realized how our actions were perceived. We're trained to be vigilant, but I understand now that vigilance without understanding can look like prejudice. These moments of connection and understanding, while small, were significant steps in the process of conflict resolution. Rosa knew that real change took time, but each of these breakthroughs was a step in the right direction. As part of the effort to find solutions, Rosa and her group also worked with city officials to implement concrete changes. They pushed for increased transparency in police operations, advocated for community oversight boards, and helped develop new training programs for officers focused on cultural sensitivity and de-escalation techniques. However, the path to solutions was far from smooth. There were setbacks and tense moments that threatened to undo the progress that had been made. A police shooting in a neighboring city reignited tensions, leading to protests and calls for more immediate action. In response to these challenges, Rosa organized a peace walk through the neighborhood. Unlike a protest, this event was designed to bring people together in a spirit of unity and shared purpose. Residents of all races and backgrounds walked side by side, many holding hands or engaging in conversation with neighbors they had never spoken to before. As the weeks turned into months, the impact of their conflict resolution efforts began to show. Reported incidents of racial profiling decreased, while community satisfaction with local law enforcement began to rise. The Community Oversight Board, after some initial growing pains, proved to be an effective tool for accountability and transparency. Rosa's approach to conflict resolution, emphasizing listening, understanding, and finding common ground, began to influence other aspects of community life. Neighborhood associations adopted similar techniques for addressing local issues, and schools implemented programs to teach students about diversity and conflict resolution. However, Rosa and her group also had to accept that not all conflicts could be fully resolved. Some wounds were too deep, some disagreements too fundamental to be easily reconciled. They learned to measure success not by complete harmony, but by creating spaces where difficult conversations could take place respectfully and productively. As their conflict resolution efforts continued, Rosa found herself reflecting on the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., with whom she had marched in her youth. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. She realized that their work was part of that long arc, each small step forward contributing to the larger journey toward a more just and equitable society. The journey was far from over, but Rosa felt a growing sense of hope. She knew that by helping to resolve these conflicts, they were not only addressing immediate issues, but also laying the foundation for a more united and understanding community for generations to come. The months of intense community dialogue, policy changes, and personal growth marked a significant turning point for Rosa and the entire neighborhood. What began as a frightening confrontation on her porch had evolved into a movement for change that touched every aspect of community life. This transformation brought with it new challenges and opportunities that would take Rosa and her allies down a new path. One evening, as Rosa sat on her porch reflecting on the progress they had made, she received an unexpected call. It was from the mayor of a neighboring city who had heard about the transformative work taking place in Rosa's community. He wanted to know if Rosa would be willing to share her experiences and strategies with other communities facing similar challenges. This opportunity presented Rosa with a pivotal decision. Sharing their story on a larger platform would amplify its impact far beyond what she had initially imagined. However, it also meant stepping further into the public eye and taking on responsibilities that seemed daunting for a woman of her age. After careful consideration and lengthy discussions with Michael, Johnson, and her other close allies, Rosa made a momentous decision. She would accept the invitation, seeing it as a chance to extend the reach of their work beyond their own neighborhood. "We have an opportunity here," Rosa explained to her core support group, which included Michael, Johnson, and Mrs. Peterson. "What we've started in our community can be the beginning of a much larger movement for change in police-community relations across the country." The group was energized by the idea, but also aware of the challenges it posed. Expanding their efforts would require resources, organization, and a willingness to engage with communities that might be even more resistant to change than some areas of their own. With the support of her advocates, Rosa began outlining plans for a new initiative. Its mission would be to provide resources, training, and support to communities seeking to address issues of racial bias in policing and improve police-community relations. This initiative, which they named Bridging Understanding, would bring together community leaders, law enforcement officials, and social justice advocates. It would offer a comprehensive approach to community reform based on the lessons they had learned through their own experiences. As news of this new direction spread, it created a renewed sense of purpose within the community. Many who had been actively involved in local efforts saw an opportunity to contribute to a larger cause. Local businesses offered their support, schools began incorporating conflict resolution techniques into their curriculum, and even some police officers, inspired by Sarah's example, volunteered to share their experiences with other departments. This new direction was not without its challenges. Some community members worried that the focus on national issues would detract from ongoing local efforts. Others were concerned about the increased scrutiny that would come with a higher profile. Despite these concerns, Rosa felt certain that they were on the right path. As she stood before the newly leased office space that would serve as the headquarters for Bridging Understanding, she felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. The journey that had begun with a frightening confrontation on her porch had led to this moment, the start of a movement with the potential to impact communities across the country. The turning point had come, and with it, a new direction not just for Rosa but for all who had been a part of this transformative experience. As she took her first steps into the office, Rosa knew that the real work was just beginning. In the months following the launch of Bridging Understanding, Rosa found herself reflecting deeply on the journey that had brought her to this point. The woman who looked back at her in the mirror each morning was both familiar and different. Still the same face that had weathered nearly 8 decades of life, but with eyes that now held a new fire of purpose and understanding.
Rosa recognise the inner self,
a resilience she had never known she possessed. Even after all the years of facing adversity, the confrontation with the police, the subsequent community upheaval, and the challenges of leading a national initiative had tested her to her limits. She had faced public scrutiny, grappled with complex social issues, and shouldered the responsibility of being a voice for change. Through it all, she had emerged stronger and more committed to her cause than ever before. Her perspective on community and social change had undergone a significant transformation. While she had always believed in the power of individual action, she now saw how a single incident could ignite a movement, how personal stories could drive social change. She understood more than ever the importance of bridging divides, of creating space for difficult conversations, and the power of empathy in overcoming deep-seated prejudices. Perhaps the most significant area of growth for Rosa was in her leadership role. Once content to be a quiet pillar of her community, she had been thrust into the spotlight as a voice for change in police-community relations. She had learned to navigate media interviews, speak persuasively to diverse audiences, and build coalitions across groups with different interests and perspectives. This new public role had its challenges. Rosa often felt the weight of responsibility, knowing that her words and actions could have far-reaching consequences for communities across the country. There were moments of doubt, times when she questioned whether she was the right person to lead this movement. But in those moments, she would remember the words she had spoken to Thurgood on that fateful day. It's time for a change, and if I have to be the one to start it, then so be it. Rosa also reflected on how her relationships had evolved. Her bond with Thurgood had deepened as mother and son became partners in a shared mission. She had formed unexpected alliances, like her friendship with Mrs. Peterson, which served as a powerful example of the change they were working towards. Even her relationship with Johnson Rodriguez had transformed, becoming a testament to the possibility of growth and redemption within law enforcement. As she prepared for another day filled with meetings, interviews, and strategy sessions, Rosa felt a sense of gratitude. Despite the challenges she faced, the incident that had started it all had stripped away complacency, forcing her to confront difficult truths about society and herself. It had been a transformative journey, one that had ultimately led to growth, both personal and collective. Rosa Washington, the elderly woman who had once been harassed on her own porch, had emerged as something greater, an advocate, a community leader, and a symbol of resilience and change. As she looked toward the future, Rosa felt prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead, armed with newfound wisdom, a stronger sense of purpose, and an unwavering commitment to justice and equality. She picked up a framed photo from her desk, a picture of herself surrounded by her core support group, including Michael, Johnson, and Mrs. Peterson. This served as a daily reminder of how far they had come and the work that still remained to be done. With a deep breath and a determined smile, Rosa stepped outside to face another day of working toward the change she wanted to see in the world. The growth she had experienced, both personally and as a leader, had prepared her for this ongoing journey. Rosa knew that every challenge she faced and every community she helped was one more step toward creating a more just and equitable society, a vision that had been born from a moment of injustice on her own porch, but had grown into something much larger than herself. As Rosa stood at the podium, preparing to deliver a keynote address at the National Conference on Community Policing and Racial Justice, she took a moment to observe the diverse audience before her. Law enforcement officers, community activists, policymakers, and citizens from across the country had gathered, drawn by the promise of a new approach to addressing the long-standing issues of racial bias and police-community relations. This moment, Rosa realized, was the culmination of a journey that had begun with a frightening confrontation and had transformed into a movement for change. The themes that had emerged throughout her experience, resilience in the face of injustice, the power of community to drive change, the importance of open dialogue, and the potential for personal growth to ignite social transformation, were all embodied in this gathering. As she began her speech, Rosa wove these themes together, reinforcing the interconnectedness of personal experiences and systemic change. She spoke of her own confrontation not as a story of victimization but as a catalyst for transformation. She highlighted the stories of Sarah, Mrs. Smith, and others in her community as examples of how facing uncomfortable truths could lead to powerful change. Our journey towards justice and equality is far from over, she concluded, her voice ringing with conviction. But what we have learned is that change begins with each of us, in our willingness to confront our own biases, to listen to experiences different from our own, and to work together towards a common goal. Every conversation, every policy change, every moment of understanding is a step towards the society we aspire to build. The applause that followed was more than just an affirmation of her words. It was a resounding endorsement of a new vision for police-community relations and social justice. As Rosa stepped down from the podium, she felt a sense of both closure and a new beginning. The ordeal that had begun on her porch had led to this transformative moment, not just for herself, but for communities across the country. In that applause, in the faces of the inspired audience, Rosa saw the promise of a future where justice, understanding, and equality were not just ideals but lived realities. It was a future she was now helping to create, one conversation, one community, one changed mind at a time. This story serves as a powerful reminder of justice, resilience, and courage in the face of injustice. If you were in Martha's or Michael's position, how would you have handled this situation? Have you ever had to stand up for what's right, even when you knew it wouldn't be easy? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story could inspire and create positive change. If you found this story meaningful, don't hesitate to share it with friends and family to spread the message of respect and equality. Thank you for following along until the end. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next emotional and valuable stories. May you always be strong, full of hope, and ready to act for the good. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe to receive the latest updates. These stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared for the purpose of spreading human values in life and have been rewritten with the assistance of AI. If there are any errors, please kindly forgive them. Wishing you all the best in life.